Well, good evening. I'd like to welcome you here tonight. Appreciate so much you taking time on a Monday night to be here to honor God and the singing that we've taken part in and prayers, and also from the study of His Word. And we appreciate so much just you taking time out and your interest in that. And I know that we'll be blessed from being together tonight just from the fact that we're here for that purpose. And again, I want to thank you for your hospitality yesterday and even today, all the kind words. Y'all are all encouragers, so that must have worked yesterday to ask that question. And y'all been very, very gracious to me, and I really appreciate it. I'd like to thank Ron and Bonnie for taking me out tonight. I'd just like to say that I'm fed up right now. I am. I'm having a hard time because I'm just still full from eating, but I appreciate the hospitality there, and it just means so much. And look forward to the rest of this week. I know that it'll go by fairly quickly, but just know that we'll enjoy being together and enjoy studying the Bible. You know, there's no greater book in this world than the Bible. And it's wonderful to be able to open it and study it at any point in time. And that's our prayer tonight, that we will receive something that will help us every day in our lives, maybe even help somebody as a result of our study tonight. I already gave you the advertisement, so I'm going to go ahead and start talking about what we're going to look at tonight. And that's the fact that we all know that there are storms that come our way in life that are difficult to handle. And all of us have them. We may not have them in the same way, but we all have storms. We all have difficulties. And when we think about storms, nobody really likes for those to come your way or my way because they are difficult. And so I want to begin by telling you a little bit about what I kind of left you hanging on last night or yesterday about some events in my life, and let that kind of be the introduction and go right into some things I hope that are helpful in how to handle these storms that do come our way. Back when I was a fairly young guy, I had gotten married to a young lady named Julie. We had two wonderful children. We found out when our daughter was 2 and our son was 2 months old that our daughter had diabetes. And that really shook our world, because here's a 2-year-old with diabetes, and you're just thinking it's Christmas time and all the sweet stuff that, you know, comes with the holidays. And automatically we kept thinking this is going to be difficult. And we kept wondering, you know, how in the world are we going to handle this? And so we ended up doing well with that. And that was one of the first big storms, I guess, that came my way. When anything affects your children, it really affects you. And that's what happened with us at that point. However, in the next couple of years, we didn't realize what was on the horizon, but when Courtney was now 5 years old and about to start kindergarten, we decided we'd go on a quick vacation up to Pigeon Forge, take a couple of days to get ready, because we knew once school starts, you know, you are busy the rest of your life with your kids. And so we took a few days, went up there. Our second day while we were there, getting ready to do the day's activities there in the hotel room, just getting ready and getting dressed to go out. All of a sudden, I see this image behind me in the mirror. I'm brushing my teeth, I believe, and my wife throws a towel at me. And I wondered, what in the world is she doing? And I turned around and looked, and she fell back on the bed. And I went over to her, and I could tell something was not right. It looked like she was having a stroke. Her mouth was drawn to one side. She could not talk. And of course, I'm scared to death. Our 2 small children are there. And so I call 911. And by the time the first responder gets there, she can talk. She's kind of come out of it. And I said, "What was that?" She said, "I don't know, but something just happened to me." Long story short, we went to the hospital there in Pigeon Forge. And after a couple of hours of being there, they came into the room and sat down, young doctor. I had both my kids on my knees, you know, and she was there on the bed. He sat down by her, and I said, "Well, what's going on?" And my wife was a nurse, and so she turned to him and she said, "I don't have a brain tumor, do I?" And he said, "Yes, you do." And I tell you, I could have about melted through the floor at that point. I went weak, and I thought, what in the world? Because I automatically thought, you know, brain tumor equals probably death. And so we just were shocked. We were scared to death. Ended up coming back to Florence, meeting with different doctors, and she had surgery the next week. They removed the tumor, but again, it had grown into the motor strip that controls her left side, paralyzed her, and there she was in the bed for the next several days without moving, a muscle. And I told you about us coming over here to rehab, and after 3 weeks, that's where I left you hanging last night. After 3 weeks and a day of being over here, she walked out of Health South with a big brace on her ankle and a quad cane, but we were so thankful that she was able to walk out and move again. And so she climbed up in the car, we went home, and she continued rehab for the next several months. Got better to the point where no brace and no cane, and got to be able to drive again and start normal activities. But then we moved to Northport. Great opportunity for me to preach there and work with that church and work with Ron's parents there. After 3 weeks of us being there, she had another seizure, like she had in the hotel room. We take her to DCH hospital there. They do the scans. They come back. Same story again. You've got a 3.5 centimeter mass in your brain, same location. It had grown back from a clear MRI in September. This was January. And so it had grown back really quickly. And so we knew at that point we were up against a pretty tough battle. Had surgery there at DCH the next week, removed the tumor, no paralysis this time. Matter of fact, it scared me. They came in on Wednesday, we had surgery Monday, and they said, "We're discharging you, y'all can go home." And I said, "We just had brain surgery. I'm not ready to go home. Let's hang on a little bit." But we went home, and she did well. We had chemo and radiation to follow up at that point. And for the next year and a half, she did pretty well. And then we started having more trouble and went through that process again, another craniotomy, another surgery. They found more active tumor once again, and that was in August, and she ended up passing away in November of 2005. Now, at that point, at age 33, and you just think, how in the world is this happening? Why is this happening? And we've got 2 small children. They're in kindergarten and 3rd grade now. And so here I am, a single dad. And, I have some questions, but also just realize, I'm not immune just because I'm a Christian and a preacher to life's challenges, to life's storms. And this was a big one for us. And it had been for the last 3.5 years of dealing with brain cancer. And so with all that said, we all have storms like that, and you may have had a health issue yourself, or you may have had it in your family. You might have had a financial issue. You might have family issues that come your way, whether it is a divorce in your family, or a rebellious child, or a drug addiction, whatever it is. Listen, all of us are touched in some way by a storm, and it's difficult to handle. And I had a difficult time handling all the different aspects of that major storm that came our way. But when we start thinking about it, a lot of times we'll end up in the middle of the storm asking some questions. And one of the main questions that we're going to deal with tonight is, where is God in the storm? Where is He when I'm hurting? Because there are times where it seems like, because we are experiencing pain, that God is not with us. And it's natural to have those questions. So tonight, I hope that our message is going to be something that, as we study together, will encourage you, will encourage others, maybe that you can share these scriptures with and these thoughts. And more than anything, I hope that we all understand that we're going to experience some sort of problems in our lives, but how we handle those really makes all the difference. And even though they're challenging and even though they hurt, there's still things that God is going to allow us to go through in order to strengthen us and to help us in a lot of ways. Now, you've heard this saying, and I'm going to challenge this saying tonight. We've heard the saying, well, God won't put more on you than you can bear. Now, I've heard that. You may have even said that. And I can tell you this, I don't really think that the Bible says that. The Bible says God will not allow you to be tempted above what you're able to bear. But nowhere in the Bible does it say that God won't put more on you than you can handle. Matter of fact, I think it's really just the opposite. I think God does put more on you than you can handle so that you'll remember that you need God, that you have to have Him during times like that. Because if you read from cover to cover in the Bible, there are people that had enormous burdens upon them that they really had a difficult time handling. And it wasn't because they were strong enough to come through it. It was because they had God with them that they were able to do that. And so let me begin by saying, just because you have a difficulty on you doesn't mean that you have to bear it alone, or that somehow or another that God expects you to do that without Him, because He wants you to look to Him during those times. So with all that in mind, let's start by looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And what we see here with Paul and his thorn in the flesh, as we know it as, is one of those storms I think that Paul went through. And it's one of the health, category in his life, where we don't know exactly what his thorn in the flesh was, but we do know he had one. And we know it was hard for him to handle. So much so that he asked for it to be removed from him. So let's read this together, and we'll start there and ask a few questions. He says in verse 7, "And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to buffet me or to beat me, lest I be exalted above measure. Concerning this thing I pleaded with the Lord 3 times that it might depart from me. And He said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distresses, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong." So Paul understands, really as he goes through the storm, the fact that this storm is actually something that can result in some good things in his life. And he acknowledges that as he describes this thorn in the flesh, the storm that he's going through. And a lot of times we have some of these same questions that we're going to look at tonight. And no doubt you've had somebody ask you these questions as well. First of all, when we think about Paul, when we think about the situation of life storms, we have to ask this question and be reminded that people will ask this question: why is He allowing this to happen to me? Why is He allowing this to be a part of my life or a part of my family's life, my loved one? Why is He allowing all these things to happen? And I think that's a normal question that a lot of people ask. Matter of fact, when I was at Northport, after my first wife passed away, I had a young lady who lived in the neighborhood that I lived in that went to church with us, and her name was Jennifer, and her dad had been sick with cancer about the same time that Julie was sick. And we had prayed and prayed and prayed for her dad. And I remember that he passed away before Julie did. And she dropped by one day after Julie had died and just asked this question in my living room. She said, "Brad, does prayer really matter?" And I knew where she was going with that. And she elaborated on it. She said, "Listen, we prayed for my dad and your wife. We had other people praying for our family members to get better, and they did not get better." And so she was distraught about the fact that so many people prayed to God that they would both be healed, and they were not healed. And she had a lot of questions. She even had some doubts of, again, whether or not prayer really matters. And so we had this discussion about, does prayer matter? Does God hear our prayers, and does He answer according to what we want all the time? And we know the answer to that. He doesn't always give us what we want. But just to take that question and say that all of us have those questions. Now, we've always heard it's wrong to question God. And again, we see the fact that a lot of people question God at times in the Bible. Not in a disrespectful way, but just simply wondering, why is this happening to me? And that's what we're going to start with tonight. Why is God allowing these things to happen to me? Why is this storm upon me? And if I serve Him, why would He allow it? Or why doesn't He take it away? And those are the things that a lot of times we struggle with. If we're serving God faithfully, why doesn't He remove it from our lives and make our situation so much better? Because somehow or another we've gotten the idea that if we serve God faithfully, we ought not to have any problems. But let me ask you this question. When you read about God's people in the Bible, were they living a problem-free life once they followed Jesus? Were they immune to all of life's hurts and pains and problems? We know the answer to that. Obviously, they struggled like we do. But for whatever reason, we tend to think that those things shouldn't happen to us. And so, what is the explanation? Why is it that God allows us to go through these difficulties? Well, first of all, I think this is just the beginning of the answer, is the fact that we live in a fallen world. Ever since Adam and Eve introduced sin into this world, the world went from a perfect place to an imperfect place. And so now we are subject to a fallen world's activities and effects. In other words, in a random way, I guess you would say, all of us are subject to sickness, to accidents, to any kind of pain or problems that come our way. I mean, we're subject to the actions of others as well as our own actions. All those things are a part of living in a fallen world. Because things are not perfect and because we are subject to those same things coming our way, whether it's cancer, whether it's diabetes or any other disease or problem, we know that Christians get sick with those things just as much as non-Christians do in our world. And so I think that's where we start, is the fact that we're all subject to those things just because of where we live. We're in this physical, fleshly body, and this fleshly body can obviously catch things or have things happen to it because of where we live. And so, first of all, we're not immune to it because we live in a fallen world. But secondly, there are times where problems benefit us. And that's what Paul acknowledges here in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, that as he looks at his situation, this thorn in the flesh, notice that he says that there are some benefits for him. He says, "Lest I be exalted above measure, this was given to me." To keep me humble, to help me realize who it is that I ought to depend on. All these things are coming to Paul's mind once he realizes that God tells him no, that He's not going to remove it from him. And so when you look at Paul, he realizes the benefits. And then he says, "I take pleasure in these things." And that's a special mindset, isn't it? To think about having storms of life and actually looking on the bright side instead of the negative. Because most of us, when we have something bad happen to us, we just feel terrible about it because, we just don't like it. But do we ever take time to think that this actually can be good for me in some way? We'd rather not have it. We'd rather it not be that way. But since we do have it, is there a benefit in what we're dealing with? A lot of times we can't see the benefit in a rebellious child that may do things that we know are very sinful. We don't see the benefit in having financial issues. Why would we want those? We'd never ask for them. But when they do come upon us, again, since we're in the middle of them, let's ask the question, how can this benefit me? And that's what Paul did and found the benefit in the middle of the storm. So he realized that it does help him to grow and to be strengthened. Y'all have heard this before, but you think about a butterfly. How does a butterfly become a butterfly and fly around and brighten our day in such a beautiful way? Well, it starts out as a caterpillar. It finally is in that cocoon, and you remember that at some point it starts flapping those wings inside the cocoon. And it's like the story of the little boy that goes up and says, "I want to help the butterfly get out," and he tears open the cocoon, and the butterfly never flies. And his mom explains to him, it's the struggle of getting out of that cocoon and breaking out of that makes those wings strong enough to fly. And so, folks, if we look at our lives that way, when we're in the struggle, that's strengthening us to deal with life in a better way. It's strengthening us spiritually because we learn to depend on God more during that time. And so, why is God allowing this to happen to me? Well, it can benefit me. It can strengthen me. And I can tell you this. I am a better person. I am a better Christian. I'm a better preacher at ministering to other people because of the storm that we went through with Julie. I have a lot more compassion for people. I can tell you this, I used to not think much about people sending cards when people were sick. I thought, that's kind of a waste of a stamp. You know, we get the card, we throw it away, you know, no big deal. When we were at Health South here, we got cards upon cards from different churches and our own church. And what we would do every time, I came every day for that 3 weeks in a day. I even did my grandmother's funeral in the midst of that, but I made sure that I came to keep her encouraged. So I came every day here to Huntsville. And so I came, and the first thing we would do is we would open the mail. And we would read all the cards, and then I would start taping them up on the wall around the room. And we finally got almost the whole room wallpapered in cards. I mean, I have a box this big at home full of cards that I kept. You know, they didn't mean much to me before this health problem came. But now I realize what those cards mean when you're in that spot. And how much it brightens your day just that somebody took the time to write you a note of encouragement, to tell you they're praying for you. That meant so much to me. Now, she had a roommate in Health South. Poor little lady, she had her knee replaced, didn't have much family. One day we were sitting over there going through her mail, and all of a sudden the lady, through the curtain that divided the room, she said, "Woohoo!" And I thought, what in the world? And I looked over there, I said, "What is it?" She said, "I finally got a card. Got one." And I felt terrible at that point because here I am putting them all up over the room, you know, and she hadn't even gotten one up to that point. And, you know, I said, we need to send this lady some cards when I got back home. But, you know, when you think about that, you think about just those little things that encourage you. And I say that to say, you know, it gives opportunity for other people to serve as well. When somebody's in trouble, then everybody else has the opportunity to serve. Think about it. If nobody had any problems, there wouldn't be very many opportunities for service, would there? And so we have to look at it in that way, is the fact that it's a positive thing in a lot of ways. We're able to help others. And by the way, I can tell you this too, that I think God turns your problem into your ministry. If you think about it, who is it that has these walks for cancer research and people that raise money for, you know, this cause or that cause? It's the people that have been through it themselves. You know, I didn't tell you about Christy. We got married almost 13 years ago. God blessed me with another wife, and she is wonderful. And I know that if you got to talk to her yesterday, you know how blessed a man I am, that God is good to me. And but Brooks, our son, had leukemia when he was little. So she had that storm to deal with back before I even knew her. And they ended up starting a walk in Florence called Light the Night. I think there's one here in Huntsville as well for lymphoma and leukemia research. And she was the chairperson of the Florence Walk for, I think, 13 years. Raised, I don't know how many thousands upon thousands of dollars. Even came up with a new drug that even helps other cancers now, other than leukemia. But, you know, that became something that she was very interested in and tried to help with because of what happened in her family. And I think that's true of us. I've had guys call me that have lost their wives and said, "Can you help me? Can you talk to me? I just need to talk." Matter of fact, there's a guy named Randy Latner from Northport. His wife also had a brain tumor during the time that we were down there. And there were times where after my wife died and I moved back to Florence, that Randy would drive 2.5 hours from Tuscaloosa to have lunch with me because he said, other people that I try to talk to about this, they just really kind of fold up on me when I start hitting them with this heavy stuff. And he said, "I know you can handle it." And so he would come up and spend the day with me just to have somebody to talk to. And so it does. Our pain becomes our ministry a lot of times because we can relate and we can help others during that time. So again, it's a benefit to us. And then the other thing is the fact that it helps us to trust and rely on God. Because when we're weak, then we look up. Then we tend to be people of prayer more than ever, right? You know, you think about the times in life where you prayed the most and been closer to God probably than any other time. When was it? It's probably during a time of trouble, a time of distress, to where you really leaned on God to help you through it. And so it helps us to realize He's the one in charge. He's the one in control. And as Paul is reminded here, as he prays about this and asks for it to be removed from his life, notice what his response is in verse 9. My grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And so what we see there is the fact, again, the benefit, but also the dependence on God during this time. And so why does He allow these things to happen to us? First of all, because we live in a fallen world, we're subject to these things. You never know what's going to happen each day. And I don't want you to live a paranoid life, but just realize that, at any time, anything obviously can come our way, and we're not immune. And that's the point, that we're not immune to those problems. It benefits us in some way, it strengthens us, and it helps us depend on God. And so when we start thinking about those matters, you can't help but think about Paul. Paul, he's the Apostle Paul, right? He's written, 12, 13 books of the New Testament. He has gone on all these missionary journeys. And the only record that we have of Paul asking for something from God is this: please just take this thorn in the flesh away from me. And logically, we would think that would help him, right? If he's hurting in some way, if he is hindered health-wise from traveling as much as he wants to travel, then that would actually be a good thing to remove this thorn in the flesh, right? It would actually benefit the kingdom for him to be cured of whatever this problem is. And so our logic is, this is Paul. Surely he'll get the right answer from God. He'll get the answer of yes. But God tells him no. And if he can tell Paul no, he can tell Brad no. And he can tell you no. And he has a better purpose in mind, though, than what we have in mind. If we've lived long enough, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, how many times have you been thankful that God did not give you what you asked for? I've lived long enough to find that out on many occasions, that there was blessings in the things that God told me no on. And I think that we can see that even in storms as well. And so first of all, we ask the question, why is He doing this? Why is He allowing this to happen to me? And we understand He has a purpose behind that. But secondly, we ask this question: where is He? Where is He when I'm hurting? Where is He when I'm in the middle of this storm? Because it seems as though He's not here. I pray, I cry out, but I don't hear a response. Matter of fact, when we think about it, in a storm, we feel that God's not with us. And we really think about the fact that the storm is on me and I feel all alone here. But let me just start by saying this: don't take the presence of the storm for the absence of God. Because when we start thinking about a storm, sometimes we just automatically say, where is He? But don't take that as an automatic thing. Just because you're in a storm doesn't mean God's not with us. And we see that in several different places. One of those is in John chapter 11. And as you look here, you find that word comes to Jesus that his good friend Lazarus is sick. So if a good friend of Jesus is sick, what's he going to do? Well, if he's a good friend, what's he going to do? He's going to go right away to heal. Matter of fact, he didn't even have to go there. We've already learned that, right? He can speak the word from another town and heal his friend. So if Jesus has a close friend, surely he would heal him, right? Well, what's he do? He stays 4 more days in the place where he is. And what happens to Lazarus? He dies. You mean a good friend of Jesus, after Jesus learns about his sickness, lets him die? Again, questions come. What kind of friend is that, who has the power to heal and yet he doesn't do it? And so when Jesus starts to come to town where Lazarus and Mary and Martha, his sisters, are, then they hear that Jesus is on the outskirts of town. And I'm paraphrasing chapter 11 here. But you remember what happens. First of all, you have one of the sisters, Martha. She came to Jesus in verse 21, and she said to him these words: "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, we don't know the tone of how people said things in the Bible. It's kind of like reading a text message these days or an email. We don't know how people are are fluctuating their voices, if they're angry or if they're calm. And so sometimes we look at this and we think maybe Martha's getting on to Jesus and telling him, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, we give her the benefit of the doubt and say she was respectful to Jesus, and she just stated the fact that she had faith in him to heal him. And she's just simply saying, if you would have been here, then he would have gotten better. But she doesn't necessarily blame him, or she's not upset with him. But she even says, but I even know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Now notice just a few verses later that Mary, the other sister, comes out and meets him. And notice again what he says, or what she says in verse 32. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Both sisters say the exact same thing. You think they'd been talking about it before Jesus got there, maybe? You think maybe they had some of the same questions? I wonder why Jesus didn't come. I mean, if he would have been here, you know what he would have done, but he didn't come. And so there are times, I think, where we feel like Mary and Martha, that maybe he's too late. He shows up 3 days late, or he's not doing things quick enough for me. You know, let me ask this. When you pray about somebody's sickness to be made better, or when you pray about yourself, when do you want that to happen? Yesterday, right? You know, as soon as possible. We want it now. Please, God, heal me right now. Please, we know you can do it. We want it immediately. But we learn that God's timetable is different than our timetable. And we learn that for the sake of the fact that we know that God has different ideas than what we have about why we're suffering what we are suffering, why we're going through what we're going through. And so those questions are going to come. Where is he? And so Mary and Martha asked that question. But we buy into this idea that if God was with us, we wouldn't have any problems. Ever thought about that? You know, we tend to think, well, if I'm a Christian, like we started off saying, if I'm a Christian, then I shouldn't have any problems because God is watching out for me. He's protecting me from harm. And in a lot of ways, I wonder how much harm we could be going through if he didn't protect us to the point that we are protected. I mean, how many more problems could we have if God had not already blessed us with taking those away from us? But when we start thinking about why he's allowing it, and then where is he, then we start wondering, you know, is God really close to me? Has he deserted me? You know, even Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Again, a question that many of us would ask. If God was with us, we would be happy. If God was with me, I wouldn't hurt. If God is with me, why did my loved one have to die? Why did I have this disease? Or why did I have this financial issue? Or if God was here, why did he allow my family to fall apart? You know, all those questions come. But let me ask you this question. Was he with his people in the Old Testament? I think we all know that he was. Was he with his people in the New Testament? I think we can shake our heads and say yes. And we understand the fact that we have the privilege of reading the Scriptures and knowing the rest of the story. Think about Joseph. Right now we're doing a series on Joseph on Sunday mornings at Stony Point. And I love Joseph's story. I love his life and study of it. Because when you think about Joseph, he had a dream of being a great leader. But did that happen right away? No, it took 20 plus years for that to actually come about. Did he have trouble in between the dream and the actual reality of the dream? Oh, how many times? Thrown into a pit, hated, despised by his brothers, sold into slavery, lied about in Potiphar's house, imprisoned, forgotten in prison. Hey, poor old Joseph, right? That's worse than my life at this point, right? But what did God do? God used all those bad things to put Joseph in a position where he could save his whole family and his whole nation. And a lot of times we wonder, did Joseph realize that along the way? I think he realized God was with him because he prospered him. But at the same time, do you think that Joseph maybe had some questions? And so there are a lot of times where we have those questions. But we're reminded when we look at all these things that God has promised us that he's with us. He says in Hebrews 13 and verse 5, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we can count on the fact that God's presence, even though we wonder where He is, it seems like, from our standpoint, He is with us. We also see that Jesus said to the apostles at the time of His ascension, "And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age." Matthew 28, verse 20. And then we find the fact that He says in 1 Peter 5 and verse 7, Paul says, "Cast all your care upon Him, for He cares for you." Folks, we should never doubt God's presence or care and concern and love for any one of us. He is, listen, He is our Father. I remember Wendell Winkler saying that at Northport, that at his age, he said, we all need to grasp, and he finally did grasp this later on in his life. And he admitted this. He said, we need to understand what it means that God is our Father, and we're His children. And think about that from a family standpoint. Do you watch out for your kids? Do you try to bless them in every way that you can? Do you want what's best for them in every way? Well, believe us tonight that God wants the best for every one of us. Doesn't mean that if something bad happens to us that God doesn't care, that He's not with us. He is going to work those things together for our good if we believe Romans 8:28, right? And so when we start thinking about all these promises of God that He will be with us, and we could add to this list, we see the fact that God, even though He may seem far away, is right here with us in the midst of the storm. Y'all remember the poem Footprints. And you remember the fact that there's only one set of footprints, and the question is, God, where were you during this time? And He said, I was carrying you during that time. And that's why we have to, again, trust God and realize that He's with us, that He cares for us, and He will be there for us. So when we doubt His presence, realize that He is with us, and we have the faith to know that He is. And then the third and last question, who is He? You know, we asked the question, why is He allowing this to happen? The second question is, where is He when I'm hurting? The last one is a little bit more personal. Who is this God that would allow me to hurt like this? And there are a lot of people that ask that question. You know, who is a God that I don't understand why He doesn't fix this? I don't understand why, if He's a loving God, why would He not take this away from me? You know, we all struggle with that. And it's really an indictment in some ways, and in a very respectful way, of who exactly are we dealing with in God. And I think it's okay for us to struggle with that a little bit, because we really don't completely and fully understand God. And we don't know why He allows this to happen and that to happen. But we know from the Scriptures, and this is one of the verses that I think we camp out on this, and I think we need to, is in the book of Isaiah, chapter 55. These words remind us of the fact that our God is higher than all of us. He's more knowledgeable than any of us. He knows what's best. And listen to what He has to say here. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God knows more than us, even though there are times where we wonder. There are times where we think we know what's best for us. I can tell you this. I am one of, if not my favorite person on the face of this earth. I love me. And I'm not saying that from a selfish standpoint, because you really love you too, don't you? And you want what's best for you. And again, not in a selfish way. We just simply think that we know what's best for us. You know, if this happens, then my life would be better. There are times where I thought I knew what was best for me, and I ended up not getting it. And I was distraught. I thought, well, you know, this didn't work out like I thought it would. I got something different, ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. I can tell you about girls I dated in college that I prayed, oh God, please just let me marry her. She's so pretty, you know, just let it work out, you know, and it didn't. And there are times where I thought, but then God blesses me with somebody that ends up probably matching up better with me in some ways. And then you start thinking about, you know, even jobs. I can tell you this, when Christy and I got married, we interviewed with 2 different churches. the Rogersville Church that's on the east part of our county, and Stony Point. And I just knew Rogersville was the place for me. They had just built a new building. I knew all their elders except one or two of them. I had friends there. Just a great match. I mean, this is going to be a great work. I know them, they know me. I can just slide right in and we can just take off and try to fill up that new building. You know, I was so excited. It came down to one thing. We want you to move to Rogersville. I live 19 miles from my driveway to their parking lot. And it takes about 20 minutes to get from my driveway to Rogersville Church Building. And we had two elders that said, we really want a preacher that lives in this community. And do you know that was the jumping off point? We never could get past it. We worked and worked and worked. And I promised I'll be there more during the day. I'll be involved in the school. Just couldn't. By the way, you know how many elders lived in that community? 1 out of 5. But they wanted their preacher to live there, okay? It didn't work out. We were distraught. We thought that was the place for us. Stony Point hired us shortly after that. We've been there almost 13 years. Been the best work of my life. Nothing against any other of the churches I work with, but it's just been such a blessing to me. And probably just because I've been there for that many years, just like Ron is blessed to be here for so many years. But when you think about what you ask for and God gives you something different, sometimes you're thinking, this is not what's best for me. I know what's best for me. And God says, no, you don't. Because my ways are higher than your ways. I know what's better for you than you even think is better for you. And so that's where our faith and trust in God comes in. That's who He is. He's a God that knows what's best for you even better than you know what's best for you. And He is going to bless you like a father would a child with doing what's best for you even when you don't understand it. And so when we start thinking about that, sometimes we hear Isaiah 55 verses 8 and 9, my ways are higher than your ways, and that doesn't satisfy. We still say, well, we know God, you're God, and we're humans, but that just doesn't make me really feel any better. So how do we handle it after that? Well, sometimes when we're not satisfied, we say, I tried that way, and it really didn't make me feel any better. I didn't feel any relief. Some actually give up on God. You know people who have lost their faith through a storm, haven't you? Some will turn to other people or other situations or substances or whatever to try to feel better in their situation, and they only make it worse. I honestly think that that's where a lot of alcohol and drug problems come from, is people are hurting a lot of times, and they just want some relief. And what do? They try to find it in these other things instead of trusting in God. And they end up, again, making a worse mess of their life than they would have if they would have just stuck with God. And by the way, did Abraham and Sarah not make a bigger mess out of their lives when they were trying to hurry God up on His promise that He made to them about having a son? Think about that. In all these different ways, we're all human beings, and we see the fact that a lot of times we don't have the patience to wait on God to find out what He has in store for us. And so sometimes we turn away from God and we're bitter and we just give up. God, you don't really care about me. You're allowing me to hurt like this, and so I'm gone. I'm not going to stick with you any longer. And I know people like that. People that I still talk to even this week that are angry at God. And it's sad when it's that way, but we all understand that that's where some people are. But let's remember Psalm 46, verses 1 and 7. Because, again, it reminds us of who God is in our lives. And it reminds us of where we ought to run during times of trouble. You know, when we have storms come our way, and we do have in the South, literally, where do we go? We go to our safe place, right? Whether it's our basement or our storm shelter or whatever. Well, that's what you have here that God describes Himself as being. Psalm 46, verse 1, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Now think about that for a moment. This is the God that we sometimes think should not allow us to have any trouble, but this is the God that's saying, when you do have trouble, guess where you need to run? I am your refuge. I am your strength. And then again in verse 7, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. And so we find over and over that God allows difficulties to come our way so that we'll remember that He's the one that we ought to cling to. He's the one that is our refuge and our strength, that we can't make it through life without Him. And so that's why we draw closer to Him. That's why we depend on Him. He is present. He is our help. He is our refuge. And today, let me just say this. Some of you may be struggling with some sort of problem. And maybe you've had some of these questions. And today may be the day that you just let all that go and you trust God once again. That you let go of the bitterness, you let go of all the questions, and you just say, God, I know that you love me, and I trust you to see me through this problem. And I hope that in some way this lesson has helped us tonight to know that with all of our questions, God has the answers. And it may not be the real clear answers that we look for. You know, we may not immediately see the good that comes from the problem that we're facing. We may not see the good that comes from it, maybe even in this lifetime. It may be something that helps somebody years from now. But whatever the case is, we understand that storms come, and they're hard to deal with, and yet God is the one that's there for us to help us through them. And so tonight, if we can help you with your storm, we have a God that stands ready to help you through this time. And it may be that you have somebody in your life that you can help along the way with the storms that they're facing. And realize that God is going to bless all of us as we serve others that are going through difficult times. Again, there wouldn't be any serving if there wasn't any problems out there. And so we see the good that can come from the bad situations. Even in the life of Joseph, his brothers meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And that's something that we can count on. And so tonight, if we can help you in any way with your spiritual life, in your relationship with God, we invite you to come right now as together we stand and sing.